Yes.
You mentioned in your presentation, or you alluded to the fact that after the Obama visit, the relationship has sort of deteriorated or slide down. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that the U.S.-Myanmar relationship has gone downhill. What I meant to say is that the situation inside Myanmar has sort of gone downhill. I mean, for example, it was after the Obama visit that you had this terrible incident in Mektida with the Buddhist mobs attacking Muslims, and it's not. I mean, there are not other examples of sort of really going downhill that I could come to mind, but it's more sort of lack of progress. And just to take an economist's example, they have been working on a central bank law, a new central bank law that is really very important in terms of making the economy run efficiently. They said that the central bank law would be passed by the parliament in January. They said it would be passed in the first quarter. It still hasn't been passed. Why not? This is a source of concern. Should be, if it is not, a source of concern.
So you were talking more about sort of the reform trajectory within Burma.
Yes. I mean, the peace process. Well, I mean, you have developments on the in terms of conflict with the ethnic minorities. I mean, that's. I would say since the Obama visit, I haven't seen any improvement, and maybe some sort of slippage. Then you have sort of democratic rule, so the democratic process, the governance process, and here, I mean, there's a whole host of issues, one of them is, for example, tendering for exploration and development of oil and gas blocks, and how this process, whether the tendering process can be transparent or not. And there are some new concerns about whether this will be done well and properly. And of course, there are huge rents involved here, and a huge potential for corruption here. And then the third area that I would mention is, economic, the economy. And now we've seen huge investor interest in this country, but not much actual new investment, because the investment climate still is generally poor. Now, there are a couple of interesting areas of quite visible progress. The one that's sort of most interesting is in mobile telephony, because a year ago a SIM chip would cost $200. A year before that it was like $500, and a year before that it was like almost $2,000. Next week, the government has announced it will start making SIM cards available for around $2 per number. There's going to be an initial distribution of like 600,000 numbers. And they have a near-term objective, 80% mobile penetration in the country by the end of 2015. That's difficult, but not impossible. And that can something, if they do something, that can be transformative. Another area, Myanmar is a cash economy, and in terms of the tourist potential and so forth, one of the problems is that it's not been possible to use credit cards or cash cards and so forth, ATM cards. The banks have been moving very aggressively to install sort of ATM machines and credit and debit cards. MasterCard is in, the Visa card is in. The leading Chinese card is in, the leading Japanese card is in, and there is a pressure to, I can stop talking anytime.
No, go ahead.
There is pressure to make sure that the payments system for international transactions, retail transactions, is reasonably well in place by the time of the Southeast Asian Games in December of this year. But even more important is to have them in place next year when Myanmar is hosting, is chairing ASEAN, and will be hosting a lot of ASEAN meetings, and in particular East Asia Summit. And President Obama, along with the other 10 countries, 12 countries that are in the East Asia Summit, they're all going to be going to Myanmar in November of 2014. Without telecommunications, I mean, it's without good communications, it's a big mess. So these are. There is some reason to think that in these areas, things are going quite nicely. Another question?
Go ahead.
This is Camera from Voice of America for Cambodian Service. I just want to ask a question that Myanmar is a China long-term allies nation. I'm wondering if the U.S. engagement now will help the country or not, because since it opens the door last few years, there's many problems happening in Burma. Is that example to ASEAN and other ASEAN nations not to sort of engage with the United States or not?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, it was about U.S. policy of engagement.
Yeah. I mean, when Burma or Myanmar started engaging with the United States, there's more problems happening in the country, like uprising and something. So is that discourage other ASEAN nations to engage with U.S. and
I don't see that at all. No, I mean, the United States has long-standing relationships with all of the other ASEAN countries. There are historical factors and other factors that are supporting those relationships. They are not all the same. Some, I mean, we have a treaty relationship, for example, with Thailand that we don't have with other countries. Look at the relationship, the special relationship that the United States has with Indonesia now. It's I think what happens in. I mean, even when our sanctions toward Myanmar were at the maximum, that didn't stop us from having better relations with the rest of the ASEAN countries. And I think what happens in Myanmar is not going to affect U.S. relations with the other ASEAN countries fundamentally, unless we start doing things toward Myanmar that the ASEAN countries feel are anti-ASEAN, that sort of are sort of making it harder for the. And I would say the sanctions policy of the Bush administration was costing the United States friends in ASEAN, and I know from personal experience that the policy analysts in the State Department at the end of the Bush administration were saying, this isn't working for us. This policy is not working for us. We're losing friends in Asia, and we're not helping the Myanmar people, 50 million Myanmar people. And so the Obama policy review that was announced in February of 2009 didn't come out of the blue. This came out of a sort of a view among our country's best foreign policy analysts that the policy that we've been pursuing for almost 20 years wasn't helping us and was actually working against our long-term foreign policy interests.
Any other questions? Kate, please go ahead. Wait for the microphone.
I'm Chang Zhu with the Legal Daily of China. Thanks for your presentation. My question is that we see there are violences and ethnic problems in Myanmar there, but we also see there are more and more foreign aid coming to this country. So I just wonder how the situation will affect those kind of foreign aid. And also you showed the oil and gas pipeline there, which I think will be in operation from next month. So how will that pipeline will be affected by the situation in the country? Thanks.
Well, these are questions. The first question is one I like in particular, since I've done this report and it sort of addresses that question. And just to give you an example, the peace process that is so important. Everybody on the outside wants to help Myanmar with the peace process. Norway, which gave Aung San Suu Kyi the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991, they sort of want to own this policy area. They've been major supporters of the Myanmar Peace Center, for example. And but Switzerland has a big interest in peace and conflict resolution. And so I can tell you, look, this is SCAR. Every organization in the world that deals with conflict resolution wants to be in Myanmar helping them build with peace building. And what is the result? A mess. I say, a bit of a mess. Because you have, just who's going to meet with all of these people? They all want to meet with Aung Min, and who's the senior minister who in charge of peace negotiations. They are all non-stop visitors to the Myanmar Peace Center in Yangon. The individuals who should be working on peace are meeting with foreign visitors and trying to figure out what aid to take and what aid not to take. And no, it's just it's sad. Now, I'm sort of exaggerating to make a point, and it's not necessarily a disaster. It may work out fine, but it's something that seems to me we need to be concerned about. On the pipeline, my personal view is that the oil will flow, the gas will flow, and the Myanmar government and the Chinese government will do everything in their power to prevent any interruptions to that flow, and I expect them to be successful. The concern I have is that the revenue transparency these pipelines to benefit the Myanmar people, it will be necessary, essential for there to be revenue transparency. In other words, every dollar that Chinese pay for the gas and for the transit and so forth should go into the budget. Should be clearly go for the people and not into the pockets of people. And I wish I were more convinced that the Chinese government saw the advantages in terms of China-Myanmar relations to having maximum transparency over this revenue flow. But there's also, I should also point out, there's another country that's involved in this pipeline project, and that's Korea. You may not know that Korea is actually playing a very interesting and important role in Myanmar today in its business life, and they are the operating company for the gas that is going through the pipeline. You understand, this is Myanmar gas that's going to China, and it's Middle East and African oil that's going to China. But the operating company for the gas field is actually Daewoo, a Korean company.
Okay, that's Alistair. Okay, good.
Yeah, you
Go
can hear
ahead.
me?
Yes.
Okay, I've got 2 points. I largely agree with Lex, but there are just 2 things which I think we should also pick up on. When we're talking about the European, Norwegian or Swiss involvement with the Myanmar Peace Centre, which is the European Union of funding, when I was talking about low-level trust before, what we're seeing with the ethnic nationalities is they see essentially the Myanmar Peace Centre as being a branch of the government. And so whatever the activities they are, and well-meaning that the funding is, there's still the perception by the different ethnic nationalities that whatever goes on there, it's essentially a function or an extended branch arm of the government. And so they really have, very little faith in what the Myanmar Peace Centre is supposed to do.
And
The
may I
Myanmar Peace
say,
Centre hasn't been around very long at the moment, but the Norwegians and again the European Union are also funding capacity building for the ethnic nationalities, but their capacity to develop policy and to function as some sort of authority is still very much in its early stages, and that money hasn't started to make any big impacts on the ground there yet either. And the second point I was going to make was about the role of other Asian powers in Myanmar. Well, we're generally focusing on the West, US, EU, Australia maybe, and their role in Myanmar. The people who are flying, as Lex said, under the radar are Korea and Japan. I mean, Japan, the other country other than China which is involved at the moment in the peace negotiations is the Nippon Foundation, the Japanese foundation, and they recently appointed as their new chief executive a former ambassador. So they've already been in there. They've been doing deals over the past couple of decades in some cases, and they're on the ground. They've got their local networks, so they're the ones who essentially are getting the most benefit out of this change process at the moment. Whether it's Daewoo with those natural resource extractions and so on, their role is actually very much understated, and I think we need a greater focus on what these countries are doing there and their effect on the peace process.
yeah, if I may, I just footnote, when Alistair refers to the Myanmar government in this sort of peace center context, what's understood by the ethnic minorities is the Burmese majority, the Bama majority, the Buddhist Bama ethnic majority. I mean, they see that as being the government. That's sort of synonymous with the government. So that's why there's this sort of lack of trust, because it's a communal issue, a religious, ethnic issue.
Any other questions? Yeah, please, go ahead. Did you get yours? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Yan Hong Shi from Asian Studies in Georgetown University. I have a question about Myitsone Dam suspension and the Chinese investment pardon in Myanmar, because given the importance of Myanmar for Chinese energy policy, I was wondering what kind of maybe regulations from Chinese government to the state-owned enterprises in Myanmar in order to improve their impressions to Myanmar's government or Myanmar's people. So, my question was that, so the investment pardon of the Chinese SOE has given the impact on the public opinion of the Myanmar people, and that leads to the suspension of the Myitsone Dam project, and which is really largely related to the Chinese energy security. And I was wondering what could be the Chinese government's change of the investment policy or the investment pattern. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, how does the compensation? How does that work? I mean, what we've got to look at the moment is as I mentioned before, Chinese SOEs now are essentially facing some competition from other places, and they also realise that the presence of protests through local populations can also lead to a suspension of a project. So they're really sort of it's a responsive action by these that they're going to have to raise their game, especially when we're looking at EITI, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which the the Myanmar government are saying they're going to sign up to and implement. I don't know how long that's going to take, but nonetheless, they're wanting to implement this initiative. And so it's really looking at, securing their investment. That's what the SOEs want to do. And this actually, through the transparency and the greater competition and the stronger voice of local people through protests and so on, will lead, I would imagine, to a better deal of compensation for those people who are, whichever way you categorize it, being forcibly displaced, either, voluntarily, or they're actually being forced to do that, being moved on. So what we've seen with the Meat Zone Dam is that their packages, they created resettlement villages around the Meat Zone Dam. And these are sort of purpose-built, and many of the complaints about this are still primarily economic. That they are, the houses are big enough, it only fits to 2 generations, not 3 generations of people in it, and they get less farmland than they had before. It's of poorer quality, and their access to livelihoods has been undermined in these resettlement villages because they're generally in sort of not great areas to cultivate crops and so on, which is still the dominant industry there. So what we'll probably see is quite a lot of tweaking essentially around this issue, like are they going to get more land, or are they going to get better land, or what those deals are. I don't think that like the Meat Zone Dam project is likely to go from suspension to being shut down. And so, yeah, I imagine that's what we're going to see in that respect there.
Yeah, I would mention another case that's quite interesting and worth following if you are on this conflict issue. This is the Let Padong copper mine. This is a substantial mining project, sort of $1 billion or more mining project. The operating companies, there are 2 operating companies. The Chinese operating company is a company linked to one of the major arms industries in China. And the Myanmar operating company is part of a military holding company. And there were protests in the local communities when the mining project wanted to expand. And these protests, you may recall, led to some police action against that injured seriously some monks. And so the question is, what to do with a project like this? And from Washington, I have a very simple solution sitting here in Washington. And that is, the government should nationalize this project. It should provide compensation to the 2 operating companies by international standards. And then it should rebid the entire project on a sort of fully transparent basis so that everyone in Myanmar sees that the benefit of this copper mining project is going to go to the people. And when the project is rebid, there would be better compensation for people, there would be better understanding and so forth. This is the whole new thing. Now, the problem is this is like pie in the sky. This is extremely idealistic, and in the practical world of politics, it's very hard to get sort of ideal solutions of that kind.
Any other question? Okay, I think I have the last question. So what would be your advice for students and scholars and researchers who are going to enter Myanmar for research, and any research questions that you think we need to think about? For both of you. Yeah, please.
I'll take a first crack on, if you see our report on page 30, there's what I call a sound bite. If you don't speak Burmese, you don't know what's going on in Myanmar, and you cannot know what's going on, and I don't speak Burmese. So for any sort of researcher or scholar, you really have to probe below the surface. I mean, it is so easy it is incredibly easy to misunderstand what is going on and what people are saying.
Cook?
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. But for interesting questions, I think what we're seeing, it depends on your real focus, but if we're looking at conflict resolution in this respect, it's how the government is responding in a way that it thinks is appropriate. Like we've seen this huge number of commissions of inquiry being established in response to these outbreaks of violence. So looking at the workings of these commissions is really quite an interesting dynamic in this ongoing process. But also, I think, looking outside of protests, but also looking at what's going on in the ethnic nationality areas as well. Because while we see a lot of change in what we essentially can call the Yangon, Naypyidaw, maybe even put in Mandalay corridor, outside of that, all these reforms really sort of become less and less the further away that you go. So when you're in the ethnic nationality areas, their experiences and their feelings and so on are very, very different to what's going on in the urban centres in Myanmar. So I think looking at the diversity within the country as well, and focusing on a particular region or area and then getting to know those. So not even Burmese, but maybe even learning Karen or Kachin or any of the other minority languages will get you a better understanding of it. And the other thing I would say actually on specifically going there, make sure that you've really done your homework before you go and do your research, because I was on this recent trip, someone was going up there and had planned on his on a map, I presume, saying I'm going here, here and here. Well, actually you can't go everywhere, particularly in the ethnic nationality areas. So, without having even done preliminary research on this, then you're likely not to be able to fulfill what it is you want to set out to achieve. So I would definitely make sure that you do the groundwork, and that's particularly true in this case, but it's true of all research.
All right, thank you very much for the very thought-provoking dialogue, Lex and Alistair. Thank you. Bye.
Cool.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Alistair.